I gave you a couple of examples where the church spoke up, where the church actually was a voice for justice, a voice for peace. But overall, really, the church was silent, and that's a problem. Now, in hindsight, nobody thinks that the church everybody thinks the church should have spoken during the Holocaust. But back then it was a very difficult thing to speak against 83% of the population. So we are in a similar situation today. It's not like the Holocaust, we don't have 6 million people being killed, but the level of violence that is happening in Gaza today has not been seen since. When was the last time you've seen such large numbers of people being killed? 30 years ago, exactly the one, during the Rwanda genocide. Since then, there hasn't been any such level of violence. What I want to, I submit to you that as followers of Jesus, we should not be, as I said earlier in the church, we should not be neutral or silent when it comes to violence, terrorism, oppression, injustice, and so on. But rather we respond to Christ's call. We will not belong to one party or another. If you're a Republican, that's fine. If you're a Democrat, that's your choice. But as a follower of Jesus, we first and foremost respond to Jesus' commandments, to Jesus' calls. First, to be peacemakers, and to speak truth and love, and to speak truth to power, to speak on behalf of those who cannot speak for themselves, and to do that in ways that exhibit the kingdom of heaven. We do so as followers of Christ. We don't go there as obnoxious people on the head. So this is my ambitious plan. I may not get through it all, but at first I want to talk a little bit about Israeli and Jewish American responses to Hamas and to Israel. You all hear on the news the popular opinion, the majority opinion. That would have been the 83% of the population back in the Holocaust. I want to show you some of the other minority voice. What's the minority voice saying? I will also talk a little bit about the context in which the background. Come on in if you want. So these things did not happen in a day. Violence did not start on October 7th. As you all know, the conflict between Israel and Palestine started back in 1948. So a little bit of background, and then I'll talk about current events, what is exactly happening. And then hopefully we will talk a little bit more about what the church is actually saying. But I may not be able to cover most of this. Again, this is not a liberal or conservative issue. It's not a Republican or Democrat. And it's not a Christian versus Muslim versus Jewish. It may be portrayed as such in the news, but we look at it differently as Christians. Feel free to grab a chair and sit anywhere that you come from. Okay, so first, as I mentioned, a minority perspective from Israeli and American Jewish voices. So there are civil human rights organizations and religious organizations that have spoken up and addressed this topic. All of them say that the attacks by Hamas on October 7th did not occur in a vacuum. Hamas did not just do this for no reason. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Tikkun is a Jewish American community, mostly in New York. It started in New York by a rabbi by the name of Michael Lerner. He's now in his 80s, but they have members and affiliates throughout the United States and other parts of the world. This is their statement. The attack was not unprovoked. So they believe that the Hamas attacks was in fact provoked. That's their statement. The world's failure to challenge Israel's ongoing occupation, apartheid, and unbridled violence by settlers and soldiers against Palestinians provide the context for what is happening now. Look at the date. That was only 5 days after the Hamas attacks. Jewish Voice for Peace is a Jewish American organization with members throughout the country, including a few here in Iowa. They made their statements immediately on August 7th, not long after Israel decided that they would retaliate. So the Israeli government may have declared war, but its war on Palestinians started over 75 years ago. Israeli apartheid, again they use the word apartheid, and occupation, and U.S. complicity in that oppression are the source of all this violence. So that's not the perspective you hear already. A few days later, October 18, they planned a rally in Washington, and some of them moved into the Capitol building and were arrested, even though they were nonviolent, but they were protesting not only Israel's response to Hamas, but the U.S. support for Hamas.
Want me to take a picture?
Just keep on. It's we Christians often forget that there are also Christians in Palestine. They have been speaking, but you rarely, if ever, hear their voice and their perspective on the news. So I'll mention just one such statement. There has been many statements by Palestinian Christian churches, organizations, and so on. Kairos Palestine is the most ecumenical group that represents the vast majority of Palestinians. Randy, do you mind reading?
We all say no to the war. The root causes driving the war are the permanent state of terror that we Palestinians living daily from the rule and tyranny of the Israeli occupation army and the absolute insistence by successive Israeli governments that there is no Palestinian state and that the Palestinian people have no right to self-determination.
So now I'll talk a little bit about the background. We have to understand these things in context. But first let me say, if anybody's interested in my PowerPoint, I'm happy to provide it. I can send it by email as a PDF document. If you want the actual PowerPoint itself, it's a large document, so I'm happy to send it to you in a different way. And if you want the source of any of the material I'm saying, any of these quotes, I'm happy also to provide you with that information. Okay, so in the early half, the first half of the 20th century, this was the map. If you looked at any map, it identifies this part of the world as Palestine, not as Israel. There was no Israel. Until 1948, it was Palestine. If you lived there, the money in your pocket was printed by the Bank of Palestine. This was the only currency throughout the country. And it says Palestine on it in 3 languages, Arabic, Hebrew, and English. If you traveled abroad, you needed a passport, and the passport said Palestine, State of Palestine. Now, Palestine was occupied by the British Empire, like much of the world at that time. So it was issued by the British government, but it stated that this is the State of Palestine. Now, in 1947, the United Nations agreed to split the country in half. A little over half would be given to a future Jewish state that would be called Israel. And a little less than half would remain for the people of Palestine. The people of Palestine at that time said no. No outside authority, no matter who it is, can come and say that they will take half of our country and give it to another people. But that's what happened in 1947. Imagine somebody, the United Nations today, saying to the United States, you have a huge plot of land, and the Roma people in Europe do not have their own country. So we will take 5% of American territory and give it to the Roma people to establish their own country. I don't think too many Americans would think that's a great idea. But that's what happened in 1947. Well, so shortly after this announcement was made, the Zionist militia, mostly from Europe, East European mostly, destroyed about 500 Palestinian villages and killed about 15,000 Palestinians. Now, they were armed. Where they got their arms from is a different story. Um, but as a result of the fighting, 80% of Palestinians became refugees. That was at that time between 750,000 to about 1 million people that became refugees. 80% of the Palestinian population became refugees, and the Palestinian government institutions were totally destroyed. So within a few months, there was no such thing as the government of Palestine. The Zionist militia had a comprehensive plan. They were able to take over the airport, banks, whatever government institutions now were taken over by a newly announced state, the State of Israel. And instead of taking 56%, a little over half that was allotted to Israel by the United Nations, they actually occupied 78%. And what was left then were these two pieces of land that later on became known as the West Bank and Gaza. The West Bank is named such because it's west of the Jordan River, and Gaza because the largest city in that territory was called Gaza. So it became the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Today, Israel continued, in 1967, Israel occupied even the West Bank and Gaza. And today, Israel has confined really the Palestinian population in their cities and towns. So the green parts is basically where you find most of the Palestinians, confined to these small parts. Israeli historians then, after a few years of Israel's establishment, and when some classified documents became declassified, they were able to go back and read all the material that the founders of the State of Israel and the Zionist leaders had. And they came to a conclusion. The most famous book that documents this is by Ilan Pappé, an Israeli Jewish historian, and he calls it the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. He makes the case that the Zionist plan all along was to expel as many Palestinians as possible, to ethnically cleanse the land, to establish a Jewish majority state. As you can see here, this is a picture from 1948. Haganah was one of the Zionist militia. So Haganah armed militants are driving Palestinians from the city of Haifa along the Mediterranean Sea. This is a group of Palestinians who lived in the Galilee area, also were pushed to the other side of the Jordan River. So this is one of the 500 or so Palestinian villages that were destroyed. This picture was taken shortly after it was depopulated and before it was destroyed. The population of this town was about 4,300 people. When David Beecher went with me in 2002 and when Patty went with me in 2003, we looked at the city of Sepphoris, and this is what it looked like. Very little of it is left. As you can see here, a little bit, there are rocks between the trees where houses used to stand. But basically, the town has been turned mostly into farmland. This is another town near Jerusalem that the ruins, as you can see, actually do resemble houses. So 500 such villages were destroyed. Palestinian refugees then lived in tents, but after a few years, the tents people start to build because obviously tents are not comfortable to live in for a long time. So the refugee camps become really just unhealthy living conditions, but become more permanent. What does it look like to live under Israeli occupation? So when you are living under military occupation, there is no civil law, but you are governed by military law. The former boss of the equivalent of the CIA of Israel, Mossad is equivalent to our CIA. He basically agreed that the way Palestinians are being treated by Israel, amount to apartheid. Notice the date actually is very interesting. This is September 6th, a month before October 7th. Jeff Halper is an Israeli anthropologist, and he explains that the way Israel controls the Palestinian population is with a matrix of control. How do you deal with 4.5 million Palestinians living within Israel-Palestine? So he explains that there is a system that Israel has established to control the Palestinian population. It includes checkpoints, it includes road closures and so on. We don't have time to get into this, but at times Israel will just simply block some roads. Palestinians going from one area to another, they have to go through checkpoints and stand in line. There are so many such lines. There are also the security barrier. Go ahead.
Amgad, you might want to mention on Netflix, The Present. That would.
Please talk about it.
So on Netflix, there's about a half-an-hour Palestinian video called The Present, about a Palestinian man getting his wife a refrigerator for a present with her young daughter. It really it's not a documentary as such. It's fictional, but it truly represents what it's like going through these checkpoints. Because as visitors, we had to go through them as well, and sometimes it was quite uncomfortable. So thank you, Amgad.
So The Present on Netflix, it's about half an hour, and I highly recommend it. So to give you an idea of what life was like for Palestinians before October 7th, and having been there last February, it's a lot worse now. Yeah, so as I mentioned, you are governed by military law, constantly under military watchful eyes. It doesn't matter where you are, university students, men, women, elderly or not. This man being arrested here by Palestinian military, by Israeli military, was protesting the occupation, and he was carrying the Palestinian flag, and then he was arrested in the fashion. One of the most difficult things that we learned about on our trips is the treatment of children under military occupation. We met with an organization called Military Court Watch, which basically documents the arrest and treatment of children under the age of 12. So again, because I have a lot to cover, I'm going to go very quickly here. So excessive use of threats, intimidation, coercion, sleep deprivation, these are things against international law. To get confessions from children. And sometimes the child threw rocks at soldiers, and that's why they were arrested. Other times they may not have done anything, but because they can get more information from a child. Who in the community is saying what? Who in the community is against the Israeli government and so on? There is another documentary, and all of this was before October 7th, that is called 2 Kids a Day. Google if you want. The documentary is called 2 Kids a Day, because on average, Israel arrested 2 children a day. I'm sorry. Israel detained, the rest were more than 2, but 2 kids were detained in Israeli military prisons. 2 kids a day. All right, you hear a lot about settlements. So settlements, after Israel occupied the West Bank, Israel started to move its population into parts of the West Bank and build settlements. In short, settlements are built primarily in the areas that are highlighted here in blue, and they were strategically located to kind of divide the West Bank. So today, Israel has about 200 settlements. These are illegal according to national law, and has a population of somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million settlers. Settlers would be Israeli citizens living in occupied Palestinian territory. Some settlers are smaller, other settlers are just simply enormous cities. As you can see, this one is called Nile Adumim. Gaza is in a part that Israel has little interest in. Now, some extremist right-wing Israelis want Gaza, but a fair number of Israelis don't care a whole lot about Gaza. So Gaza is that tiny piece of land. It's less than a quarter the size of Polk County, and was home to 2.3 million Palestinians. About 75% of the population of Gaza were either refugees or descendants of refugees from what became Israel when they fled to Gaza. So as I said, it's about a quarter size of this county of Polk. 75% of the population are refugees, and has been under military blockade, air, land, and sea, since 2007. You saw in the picture that I showed earlier the fence that was surrounding Gaza, but it wasn't just the fence, of course. Then there are watchtowers and so on to make sure that Palestinians stay locked in. It had been called the largest open-air prison on earth. Prior to October 7, 70% unemployment because of the blockade, economic blockade as well. Today, that 70% unemployment is almost 100% unemployment. We'll come back to that. Hamas, first of all, was founded in 1987. When was Israel established? 48. So almost 40 years, 39 years to be exact, after Israel was established. And by the way, Hamas is just a nickname. It's actually an acronym. Because in Arabic, the acronym for its name would be Hamas. But its actual name is the Islamic Resistance Movement. Keyword here is resistance. Some religious Muslim Palestinians felt like our secular resistance movement have not succeeded, namely the PLO. You remember the Palestinian Liberation Organization?
Yes, sir.
Said, we as Muslims have to resist based on our Islamic values. And their Islamic values are not nonviolent. They are a minority. But the key thing about Hamas is it's a resistance movement. Without occupation, there would be no Hamas. Its membership before October 7th is 20,000 to 25,000. Do you think Israel's bombardment of Gaza has increased or decreased the number of Hamas membership?
Increased.
So about 3 months ago, Israel declared that they estimate that they have killed 9,000 Hamas members. I think you're right. As a matter of fact, I agree fully that chances are they've also recruited many, many more new fighters. If you're a teenager in Gaza today and you see who's bombarding you, who's throwing rockets and missiles, and whose tanks are firing at you, who's destroying your home, why are you living in a makeshift tent instead of your home? And you will fight against those. And frankly, it's not just Israel. It's also the great empire that's providing the weapons that Israel is using. Okay, its ideology, Hamas's ideology is nationalism, Islamism, and Islamic nationalism. A lot more can be said about living conditions under occupation, but I need to move on so that we have time for discussion afterwards. Okay, so some of you know that I went with a delegation of Presbyterians. There were 35 of us. 30 of us were Presbyterians and 5 were from other denominations, including Methodists, Mennonites, and Lutherans. That, when they heard that we're going, they said, we would like to come along. So our delegation was 35 people, and we spent 9 days on the ground in Israel and Palestine. And our primary goal was to express solidarity to all who are suffering, obviously there were suffering on both sides. So we asked to meet with families of hostages that are held, Israeli hostages held by Hamas. So we were given an opportunity to meet with the man on the right with the beard. His son Omri is still actually being held hostage as far as we know. He has not been released. The man on the left is a retired diplomat who was translated for him. And then we learned that the place where we'll be meeting with them was a 9-story building equipped with the latest technology and had been dedicated entirely for the operation that Israel has established for telling the story of the hostages. And there were 13 retired professional diplomats that were accompanying them. So anytime one of the family members were speaking, they were accompanied by professional diplomats to help them tell the story in compelling ways, and also they traveled with them abroad to tell the story of the hostages. We also met with families of Palestinians who have been arrested since October 7th, and there were upward of 7,000. That Israel arrested more than 7,000 Palestinians since October 7th. And we learned that probably the reason why Israel arrested those 7,000, some of them may have been involved in resisting the occupation, but others for no other reason than to be bargaining chip with Hamas. You release the hostages, we release the prisoners. Okay, and we heard many stories from people in the West Bank who have families in Gaza. So this is the Holy Family Catholic Church in Gaza. As you see, part of it is destroyed. The church has a fairly large compound with about 4 or 5 buildings. One of them was a school that housed children with developmental disabilities. It's about 60 children that are cared for primarily by nuns, and other buildings, including the chapel. When Israel started to bomb Gaza, a large number of people, mostly Christians but also Muslims, took refuge inside the church itself. When an Israeli missile, intentionally or unintentionally, we don't know, hit part of the church, a number of people were killed and a number of people were injured. So we heard from actually these two women, Shireen and Noha. They told us about, so Shireen told us about an uncle and an aunt that died in that incident. Noha told us about her sister, who's 73 years old, who was injured and needed a hip surgery to repair her broken hip. At 73-year-old, she went under surgery without anesthesia.
Oh my God.
Because there was no anesthesia in the hospital anymore. Of 36 hospitals, today only 14 are partially functioning. The rest of them have been damaged or destroyed to the point that they are non-functional. We also heard from a young man by the name of Elias al-Najjar about his Sunday school Ilham, who also was the pianist for the Baptist church in Gaza. She was taking shelter in an Orthodox church, not in the Catholic church, but an Orthodox church. And her house was only a couple blocks away, and she needed to go back to her home to retrieve some things we don't know. People inside the church pleaded with her to not go, but for whatever reason, she felt it was necessary. So she did. Israeli snipers shot her in the leg. It was not a life-threatening injury, but there was nobody to go and rescue her, so she was there overnight. The next day they found her, basically. She had bled to death. And there were many stories like that. I saw on the NBC that mother and daughter were shot by an Israeli sniper while they were inside the church. Okay, back now to the, so these are, like I said, stories that we heard from families, Palestinians who have families in Gaza. But we also were led by this woman, an Israeli Jew, Jessica, took us on a tour of East Jerusalem. This neighborhood of Silwan, you remember in the Bible, Jesus performed a miracle in Silwan. The neighborhood is now predominantly, if not entirely, Palestinian. But Israel wants to build Israeli settlements there, as well as they have this new project called the City of David, which will basically be a park. But to do so, Jessica showed us a map that you can see here, where Israel is planning to destroy or evacuate Palestinians and demolish their buildings, and to build the City of David Park as well as Israeli settlements. And then she took us to visit Fakhri, whose home was demolished just 5 days earlier. It actually was demolished on Ash Wednesday. A couple of days later, we were driving a little bit south of Bethlehem, and we saw this bulldozer, a few soldiers, and a few Palestinians talking with the soldiers. So we stopped as what was going on, and we basically learned that the Israeli government was confiscating a row of properties, including this orchard, to widen the road that leads to an Israeli settlement in the West Bank. So again, settlements are illegal, but these are cities that Israel is building inside Palestinian territory. And the road was not wide enough now, so it's taking a row of property that included not only this small orchard, but also next door there was a playground for children, and then after that there were other buildings. While we were there, we saw this headline: Israel is planning to build 3,300 new homes in occupied West Bank. And then a couple of days later, Israel is appropriating 650 acres of Palestinian land. And then about a month later, Israel is appropriating 1,976 acres of Palestinian land in the Jordan Valley. So while the world's attention is on Gaza, Israel is expediting confiscation of Palestinian land and Palestinian property to expand its settlements and its activities, whatever. I will have to stop talking about the background and the context to what happened in October 7th. But so now let's see what's happened on October 7th and since then. As I mentioned earlier, the Gaza Strip is surrounded by this fence that you see. This is a still photo from a video that was released by the Hamas fighters. So you see them here. They broke through the fence. They used an old bulldozer to break through the fence. Where was Israeli security at that time? That's a question that the intelligence community will answer when they're able to answer it. But then they didn't have tanks or heavy equipment. They used motorcycles to go into Israel, to invade Israel. And that's when they killed 1,139 people and captured 240 hostages. Okay, so you see Gaza in the light red color. The darker red is the extent of the Hamas fighters, Hamas militia that went into Israel and committed the atrocities. Like I said, within hours, Israel started bombing the Gaza Strip, and bombs, and more bombs, more bombs. Within the first 2 weeks of bombing Gaza, Israel dropped more than 25,000 tons of explosive. That's the equivalent of 2 nuclear bombs. Wow. Now remember, how big is Gaza?
Quarter the size of Polk County.
Yes, so a quarter the size of Polk County, when you drop the equivalent of 2 nuclear bombs, what would Gaza look like? You don't have to imagine. There are a few pictures. This crater from a 2,000-ton bomb. This is a bomb that the United States gives to Israel. The United States does not use 2,000-ton bombs in populated areas because it is certain that it will kill civilians. And actually, so you may have heard about 3 weeks ago, President Biden said he's withholding some of the weapons. He's not sending them to Israel, including the 2,000 bombs. And by the way, he's reversed that decision. He's sending them now. So that crater is made by one of those 2,000-ton bombs. Right. Of 2.3 million people, 5% of the population, a little over 5% now, are either dead or injured. To be exact, the numbers as of 2 days ago, 36,000 plus have been killed. Civilians, a majority of whom are children and women, 82,000 injured, 10,000 are missing, presumed dead under the rubble. 6 days after Israel started bombing Gaza, it ordered the entire population of the northern half of Gaza to move south. So people, because they were going to invade that part of Gaza to fight against Hamas fighters, so immediately people started to flee south. And they left their homes and so on, they left their belongings, just carried whatever they could. And then Israel ordered them again to move further south until a majority of Palestinians, about 1.3 million people, were crammed now in the southernmost part of Gaza known as Rafah. You've heard the name Rafah in the news recently. They started to live in makeshift tents, and the United Nations and other humanitarian organizations started to send tents as well. So as I said, about 1.7, I think I mentioned 1.3, that was incorrect. About 1.7 million of the 2.3 million people are currently displaced. There's severe famine, mass trauma, infectious diseases, and so on. And most hospitals are out of service. And so on. There is so much that I cannot cover all of. At least 1 million children now need mental health and psychosocial support. Imagine being a child, hearing the sound of bombs. It's nothing else, just you're constantly hearing the sound of bombs, but also constantly being chased and running from one place to another, and constantly seeing people around you getting injured if you're not injured yourself. That leaves an entire population traumatized. 17 children are now unaccompanied or separated from their parents. This report from Reuters was back in December. By that point, there was at least 1,000 children amputee. That was back in December. We're in June now, so that number at least doubled. The United Nations Development Program estimates that it will take 16 years to rebuild Gaza and 40 billion. More than 60% of the housing units are either totally destroyed or significantly damaged, that they're unlivable, and more than 80% of the infrastructure has been totally destroyed. That includes all universities and colleges, most schools. So students have not been in school since October 7th, but they're probably not going back anytime soon because there are no schools left because Israel has destroyed them. John Mearsheimer is a professor, distinguished professor at Chicago University. If you're interested in an hour-long lecture by him, which is excellent, I'll be happy to send you the link. It's on YouTube. And he makes the case that this is intentional ethnic cleansing. Israel really is trying to push Palestinians out. It's a continuation of the Zionist ideology that I talked about before. And he said that until December, he was not convinced that this was genocide. But since December, he said, I changed my mind. what Israel is doing now is definitely genocide. People are debating on the news whether to call it genocide or not. A professor in the University of Chicago, the professor of international studies. All right, so last week you may have heard in the news that the International Criminal Court, the prosecutor is requesting the arrest, a request warrant for the Hamas leaders who were responsible for the October 7 attacks, and the Israeli Prime Minister and the Minister of Defense. I don't know if you, but the U.S. Congress, many members of Congress wrote a letter to the ICC saying, you do this and we'll go after you, the prosecutor. But also the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant more than a year ago to whom? A very famous world leader. Anybody remember? Vladimir Putin.
Right.
But so U.S. Congress clapped when the arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin was issued. But to issue an arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, now they will go after the prosecutor. I don't have time to go into the role of the U.S. Israel drops the bomb, the U.S. provides the bombs. So I'll just show you two news items that back in April, the U.S. House and Senate both passed a resolution to give Israel $26 billion for this war. Some of it is military equipment, and some of it is just simply monetary support to help the Israeli economy because of the fallout from the war. But not only economic support and military support, but also diplomatic shielding. So 3 times the United States vetoes a decision by the UN Security Council to call for a ceasefire. So just to call for a ceasefire, this is not a condemnation of Israel, just to call for a ceasefire, the United States vetoed that decision 3 times until the UN Security Council gave up. A lot more can be said about the unproductive, unhelpful, one-sided support of the United States in this war. The Palestinian Church, what are they saying? Well, I showed you a statement earlier, but I want to show you a couple of slides from this Catholic Church. By the way, so if you go on Facebook and put Holy Family Catholic Church in Gaza, you'll get their website, the Facebook page. As Catholics, they have a Mass every day. They celebrate Mass every day, and they put pictures of the Mass every day. Occasionally, they will show pictures like this one, where the nuns are trying to entertain the children that are taking refuge there, so that the kids don't go crazy. And every now and then, they will show some other activities that they do. But every day they hold Mass, and every day they put, in Arabic, pray for an end to this war. This is a picture from the nearby Orthodox Church. It also has a Facebook page with, and I downloaded this picture from their Facebook page. The priest here is teaching the kids how to make candles, just to keep them occupied. Mitri Rahab is a Lutheran minister. He's not in Gaza, he's in Bethlehem. But he has ministries. He's a prophet in our time. If you get a chance to Google him and see the kinds of things that he's done and the writing that he's written. So he has ministries in the West Bank, but he also has a ministry in Gaza called Dar al-Kalima, House of the Word. In this case, the Word made flesh. But the slogan for his ministry is hope is what we do. When asked, what do you mean by hope is what we do, he always answers that hope is not some kind of a concept that is in the future, but what we do now the actual things that we do now to help our people, that is what would give them hope. So the Dar al-Kalima site in Gaza was totally destroyed among the many buildings, but his staff are among the refugees, and the children among the refugees. So his staff is now basically, they're just trying to provide some activities for kids to keep them out of harm's way, and in this case they are doing some face painting. This is near the beach in Gaza. One of the people we met with when we were there last February on the Presbyterian delegation is the Bishop of the Lutheran Church. So when we met with him, he shared with us a project that he wants to do. They have a building, actually, you remember when we stayed in Beit Jala, Beit Ibrahim. So right next to that, there's a building that is not fully utilized, and he wants to turn this building into an orphanage and bring as many kids as they can fit into this orphanage from Gaza. Now, as you read earlier, there's at least 17,000 unaccompanied minors. But the Israeli government has not so far given permit for these kids to leave Gaza and be moved to the West Bank. I read earlier this one statement by Presbytery of Palestine, but there are several other statements that I don't have time to get into. So what should we, as the church here in the United States, what should our witness be, and what you can do as individuals? I'll go through a couple of things very quickly, and then we can talk about it some more. So like I said, back during the Holocaust, a small voice in the church was speaking truth to power, was speaking against society, and there are a few such voices today, but not enough. So the African American Methodist Episcopal Church leaders back in February made a strong statement, and they got a lot of pushback for it, but they said, as a church, we can no longer support in the United States funding of Israel's war. So they took an official stand against that. Last month, the United Methodist Global Conference met, and they decided to divest from Israeli bonds. So they're actually divesting from the government of Israel itself. And the PCUSA, the Presbyterian Church USA, took a decision a few years ago to divest from companies that are profiting from the occupation. But we haven't gone that far. I hope that we will. A few leaders, a few Christians every now and then go and protest in Washington in front of the White House, in front of the Capitol building, calling for ceasefire. Almost every day now there are such protests. This one congregation in Pennsylvania, which actually has a synagogue that meets in their building. So both the United Methodist congregation and the Jewish synagogue together, they're calling for a ceasefire, and they put a sign in front of their building calling for a ceasefire. In case you want to do something about it, I'm going to help you do. Well, the first thing I would recommend is that you become informed. And to become informed, you're going to have to dig deeper, not just watch the local news or the national news, because you don't get a full picture when you're watching the news. Second thing is speak truth to power. Advocate at least for a ceasefire, not fighting. And hopefully advocate beyond that for a more lasting peace based on justice. One organization that is excellent, that you can sign up for their emails. You'll get one email a day. One email a week with ideas about what to advocate for. It's Churches for Middle East Peace, and the website is at CMEP, churchesformiddleeastpeace.org. there is tremendous poverty, hunger, and disaster is happening now in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. If you can donate for the humanitarian relief for victims, please do. And lastly, there's the next step. Putting our investments where our beliefs are. So this movement known as boycott, divestment, sanction, churches and other institutions, including universities, did this during apartheid South Africa. And this is what made South Africa in the apartheid system. Without boycott of people and institutions divesting from South Africa, and countries putting sanctions on South Africa. Without that, apartheid wouldn't have ended. So there are many people now calling, it's time to do the same, so that Israel would end its occupation of Palestine. All right, let me end by saying that as a reminder, as Christ followers, being indifferent, being neutral, or being silent is not an option in the face of violence, injustice, oppression, and terrorism. Whether that is terrorism is committed by Hamas, or the injustice is committed by Israel, which, by the way, Pope Francis said what Israel is now doing is terrorism. And I agree with him. And a reminder that we respond to Christ's call to us as peacemakers, to speak truth in love, to speak on behalf of those who cannot speak for themselves, and to do so in a Christian manner. All right, I think I went over the 45 minutes, but not by a whole lot. I talked a lot, now it's your turn.
I have a question that I hope no one takes this the wrong way. When Hamas reacted with the attack in October, did they envision that what would happen happened? I mean, what, if anything, was ever admitted to that from their perspective? Because what they did, we all agree, I believe, was terribly wrong. But what were they trying to accomplish in view of what could have happened? And what's happening is probably worse than anyone could have been. And then the other side of that coin, of course, is what is Israel trying to do? Sure, it looks like they're trying to wipe them off the map. I mean, there's nothing left. So it truly is a big mess.
I want to be very clear that Hamas is a terrorist organization. What they did on October 7th is terrorism. If your methodology is that of terrorism, that makes you a terrorist. Whether that is a militia group, a resistance movement like Hamas, or a country like the United States, or like Israel. And the United States supports terrorism. In my opinion, that's what the United States is doing in Israel, by supporting Israel. So I don't want to be unclear that what Hamas did is terrorism. What their goals, I guess only their leaders know. Did they accomplish their goals? I have no idea. They have not declared, to my knowledge, any of that. Did they expect the severity of that response? I have no idea. I would imagine that they expected a severe response. John Mearsheimer, the professor from Chicago, in that hour-long lecture, I actually have a short clip of it that's 7 minutes long, but we don't have time to show it. He makes the case that Israel's policy of deterrence is, I think it's a tactic called escalation deterrence, or something like that, by which if you hit Israel, they will hit you back, not with equal measure, but with such severity that you or anyone else would think many times before you decide to hit Israel again. That was not the case, Nishmaya makes, when Israel hit Iranian targets in Syria, the Iranian embassy in Syria, which is against international law. And then Iran hit Syria, Iran hit Israel, and then Israel's retaliation was very minor. We don't have time to get into that. So Hamas must have expected a severe response, but I don't know if they expected that level of response. Now, what is Israel's end-game goal that has not been declared? Military generals in Israel now are complaining against their Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, because they say, what is your end-game goal? The Biden administration has been asking Netanyahu the same thing, and he's not giving anyone any answer. If you read Israeli newspaper, they argue that Netanyahu's political standing is weak, and he's doing this for his own political career. I don't know, but that would be an internal. John Mearsheimer also makes the case that what Israel is doing now in Gaza is ethnic cleansing. While the number of Gazans leaving or permitted to leave Gaza right now is really a small number. The only people who are receiving permits to leave are people who are injured or for humanitarian reasons. Mostly people who are injured or who are sick, so they're allowed to go into Egypt or flown to other countries to receive medical treatment. But other than that, no permits are given to leave Gaza. But once the fighting stops, once Israel stops its invasion of Rafah and bombardment of Gaza as a whole, these 2.3 million people have nothing to go back to. So what are they going to do? Where are they going to live? What are they going to do for a living? What are they going to, they can't, I mean, just even prior to October 7th, they were living lives of destitutes, really, and now it's even a whole lot worse. So many of them will probably end up fleeing. You read about refugees leaving parts of Africa and the Middle East, getting on these small boats and crossing the Mediterranean Sea into Europe. Many of them drown and die and all of that stuff. Well, many Gazans have already been doing that. But now many more will just simply leave. So John Mearsheimer makes the case that Israel's end goal is ethnic cleansing. So here and then.
Do you think a two-state solution is possible or something Christians should be working for?
Good question. I'll hear the next question and see maybe I can answer both of them.
Okay.
I'm wondering, the Jews follow the first two chapters of the Bible. Is there anything in there for Israel to be following for what they're doing? Using the Bible to guide them?
Okay, I'll answer this question and I'll try to answer the next one. So a two-state solution was envisioned on the basis of the 1967 border, or the pre-1967 border, the 1948 border, also known as the Green Line, which is basically when the Zionist militia captured in 1948 the 78% of the land, that would remain as Israel. The 22% remaining, making up the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and Gaza, that would become Palestine. Well, but since 1967, as I've explained, Israel has been building settlements and designated certain areas as military bases and all of that. So Israel has moved more than 800,000 of its citizens into different spots into the West Bank. Nobody today believes or thinks that Israel has any intention of actually removing its citizens from the West Bank back into Israel proper. There's no political will in Israel to evacuate its citizens and to allow for a second state, for the state of Palestine. So only politicians speak of a two-state solution. When they do so, they assume that a majority of the people listening to them, in our case, the American public, really don't know enough about what's happening on the ground, and it sounds like a reasonable enough political solution. But that solution has not been a viable solution since even before 2000. So anyone today speaks about a two-state solution is either a politician, i.e. lying, thinks we can be fooled or appeased by just political rhetoric, or simply doesn't know enough about what's happening on the ground that two-state solution is viable. On the other hand, a one-state solution, that is, they all live together, Palestinians and Israelis, as equal citizens, that solution is not impossible, but right now is very, very difficult for the people themselves, both Israelis and Palestinians, but more so among Israelis, to accept than Palestinians. So we are caught between this, not ready for a one-state solution yet, and the two-state solution is totally dead. So, does this mean there is no solution? There is no solution given the current political dynamics and the power equation. Israel being a superpower in the Middle East, the only superpower in the Middle East, and the Palestinians being a people without even an infrastructure. I don't know the answer to your question. A majority of Israeli citizens, Jewish Israelis, are non-religious. More than half of Israelis are totally secular, many of whom are atheists. And then you have a small number, but very powerful Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox Jews who are very religious, but like many people, they find justification for their actions in the Bible. But I don't know the answer to your question. But, do they find? I would say that the Bible does not give us justification for violence. I am personally a pacifist, so I'm committed to nonviolence. Yes.
Well, it appears to me, or it seems that throughout history, when one government or people takes over the land of another, that most of the time they're after some natural resources of some kind, and to further their goal of getting bigger. And is there any these settlements that the Israelis are building on Palestinian land? Is there any financial gain to Israel from doing that, other than, or are they just simply trying to have their way with the Palestinians?
Both. So in terms of natural resources, off the shore of Gaza, so that would be the legitimate shore of Gaza, is natural gas. And Chevron is the company that is helping, that is contracted with the state of Israel to extract this natural gas. So I've boycotted Chevron. I no longer fill up at Chevron because Chevron is engaged. So Gaza, even though Gaza itself is not rich in natural resources, but you have the West Bank has the following. Most of the holy sites that tourists go every year to see, and when during times of peace or no war, more than 4 million religious tourists go to Israel, Palestine. The vast majority of the income from tourism, and again, most of the sites are in the West Bank, not in Israel. Only the Galilee area has a few sites that people visit in 1 or 2 days. But then when you go to all the religious sites, the rest of them are all in the West Bank. So all the income from tourism alone that now goes into Israel by occupying the West Bank. There are other natural resources, including groundwater. And water, of course, is a very important resource. But Israel is not only interested in the natural resources and the economic gain, it's interested also in the land.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to figure out why we continue to fund the war unless there's something to be gained.
Okay, so why the United States support Israel can be answered by, John Mearsheimer wrote his most famous book in 2007, and the book is called The Israel Lobby. So the Israel Lobby, look it up, John Mearsheimer, The Israel Lobby. I actually have the book in my car. When I give a presentation like this, people sometimes ask me about some resources. So I have a few books in the car. If anyone's interested, I'll loan you some books. But look up the John Mearsheimer and the Israel Lobby. And so the Israel Lobby, John Mearsheimer argues, is so powerful. And the pro-Israel lobby is not Jewish lobby. So don't become anti-Semitic because of the pro-Israel lobby. Actually, a lot of it has nothing to do with being Jewish. Right-wing Christians, there's a whole thing that I did not address called Christian Zionism. People like John Hagee and Frank Graham and the late Jerry Falwell and his son, Jerry Falwell Jr., and a large number of right-wing evangelical preachers teach end times theology, in which they believe that Israel has to be reestablished. Of course, the modern state of Israel today has nothing to do with ancient Israel. All the Israel language that you heard today in the worship service that Bill used in the communion liturgy, that's not about modern day secular state of Israel. When we're talking about the Israel of the Bible, we're talking about something completely different. But in their mind, those evangelical, and I'm evangelical, but those evangelical Christian Zionists believe that the modern state of Israel is a fulfillment of prophecies. So the pro-Israel lobby is not only Jewish, some of it, of course, is American Jewish, but a lot of it is also right-wing Christian. So that would be a very strong, powerful force in our politics. That's why the United States, against the United States' own interest. Okay, Dave, you have to have the last word.
Quick question.
Yes.
So you've talked about Hamas and how they, quote, rule. Can you comment on the Palestinians' authorities' effectiveness in actually representing and trying to help the Palestinian people?
The Palestinian Authority is the civil authority that governs Palestinian civil affairs in the West Bank. Prior to 2007, they also governed Palestinian civic affairs, marriages, building permit within certain areas that Israel allowed them to do that, and so on. So they had that authority until 2007 in Gaza. Hamas was a political party. It was recognized and still is recognized as a political party within the Palestinian system, but did not rule anything. In 2007, they actually won the election in 2007. In 2006, rather. They won the election in 2006. The United States did not recognize but the election was recognized internationally as a fair election. But the United States did not recognize that, and Israel did not. And they put pressure on the Palestinian Authority to continue to continue to rule, to administer the civil rule. Well, then Hamas, being a militant group, of course, they took over the civil authorities in Gaza, and they've basically been ruling Gaza since 2007. Now, why is Hamas still ruling Gaza, even though they really have very little support internationally, except from a few countries like Iran? The more interesting question actually is a discussion that is happening in Israel, but you don't hear about it here in US media. So on October 8th, the day after the Hamas attacks, there was an op-ed in the Times of Israel. It's a newspaper, one of the larger newspapers in Israel. It's called the Times of Israel. That newspaper article, that op-ed, the title was something like, "For years, Netanyahu propped up Hamas, and now it's blown up in our faces." For years, Netanyahu propped up Hamas. So the op-ed is not saying if Netanyahu propped up Hamas, but it's making an assertion that that is the case, that Israelis know. The question is, why would Netanyahu prop up Hamas? And what the op-ed is, the case is making is that the biggest, Netanyahu and actually his predecessors and his successors are against a two-state solution. The question that you raised earlier. Do Israelis want a second state next to them, a Palestinian state? And the answer is no. So Netanyahu's way of fighting against a Palestinian state is to divide and conquer. Divide the Palestinians, weaken the Palestinian Authority by strengthening Hamas. Netanyahu is no fan of Hamas. He's an enemy of Hamas. But he realizes also that Hamas is an enemy of, a political enemy, a rival of the Palestinian Authority. So to strengthen Hamas is a way to weaken the Palestinian Authority. If anyone's interested in that op-ed, I'll send it to you. Again, it was in the Times of Israel.
I think what you're saying is that, and a lot of people have said this, that Netanyahu would not be in power. He's a corrupted politician, and I think the courts are even after him. He would not be in power if there was not war and conflict. And so as soon as conflict, if Israel goes into a peaceful settlement with the Palestinians, Netanyahu's job goes away. And so I think there's a right-wing faction out there that wants conflict in order to stay in power.
Yes. Yeah. But he's not without support.
Oh, no.
He's not, because he has a strong coalition of the more conservative right wing.
Quick, maybe this isn't a quick question at all, sorry. But we've heard that there have been a lot of protests in Israel itself against the war. Who's protesting and why are they protesting?
So 90% or so of the Israeli public is supportive of destroying Hamas.
Wow.
Supportive of going after Hamas at whatever cost. Because obviously, they are in pain of what happened on October 7th, and rightly so. Unfortunately, though, fighting against Hamas without ending the occupation, you're only increasing Hamas's popularity. Hamas wouldn't be in existence as a resistance movement. If there's no occupation, there would be no resistance. So the protests are against Netanyahu's prioritizing winning the war without negotiating enough to release the hostages. So when we were there in February, we actually were in Tel Aviv on Saturday, and we saw some of these protests. And they were peaceful protests, and we walked among them. There's nothing to be afraid of. But they're protesting against Netanyahu because Netanyahu, they say, is not prioritizing the release of hostages. He's willing to sacrifice the hostages in order to win the war. John Mearsheimer and many others are saying, you've already lost the war. Hamas is really winning the war. You can win the war militarily, you can level Gaza as much as you want, but you're not going to eliminate Hamas. You cannot eliminate an ideology by force. Hamas is an ideology. Like Zionism is an ideology. You do not have to, if you're a Jew, you're not necessarily a Zionist. If you're a Jew and you believe in, that Palestinians are human beings that have a right to their self-determination and so on, you do not have to buy into the idea of Zionism to take over all of Palestine. And likewise, Hamas, this is an Islamic extremist ideology. It's not, a majority of Muslims do not support what Hamas is doing.
Thank you.
I'm happy to stay. I'm not rushing to leave, but I also want to give
Yeah.
those of you that want to leave the freedom to do so.
Thank you. Let's give Amgad a... Thank you.